Welcome, everybody. We just opened the room. We have about 300 people registered, so we'll wait a few minutes until we get everybody in. You can see the agenda on the screen. If you're having a technical trouble, I see Gloria Waldman. Text Ava, maybe she can help you. Ava Farkas.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a setting on that was wrong. So now everybody try. Turn on your videos. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
Are people still coming in, Ava?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the speakers are not yet on the full screen while Bonnie's sharing the agenda. We're going to take that agenda off in a minute or two, and then you'll see everybody on full screen. Okay, so here's our agenda. I say good afternoon to everybody. Welcome you to our first meeting of 2023-24 to a new season of programs. You'll see that today we're kind of doing our programs in reverse. We're having our healthcare stuff first, then our local union reports, and then we're very privileged to have once again Ruth Milkman, who will speak to us during the second part of the meeting about what unionization looks like across the country. So I hope you had a restful and enjoyable summer. I know that I very much appreciate the respite that we have had from day-to-day tensions around Medicare Advantage. Thanks to Judge Lyle Frank's ruling back in July, we still have our Medicare, traditional Medicare, and we still have our senior care as we know it and as we have been fighting for, and that is great news. So we're going to start today with Dean Hubbard and Debbie. They'll provide updates on the Medicare Advantage situation. And then President Davis will pick up on the healthcare theme as part of his remarks on the state of the PSC. I will follow with a brief overview of our retiree chapter work last year and looking forward, and then we'll hear Dr. Milkman talk about unionization. So I don't know what they're going to say, and I don't know who goes first, Debbie or Dean, but you're on. Who's starting? Debbie, Dean?
Dean.
Dean, okay, all right. Let's get Dean.
Okay, there we go. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. As Ann mentioned, the biggest piece of news, which I'm sure everybody is already well aware of, is that Judge Frank converted his temporary injunction into a permanent injunction. And the effect of that is that the city may not stop paying for supplemental Medicare. And so they will continue, for the time being at least, paying for people's senior care. So our task now, our primary task now, is to defend that ruling on appeal. We are interested in filing an amicus brief in support of Judge Frank's decision. The rules of the appellate division require that our arguments, that we have to get permission from the appellate division to file our brief. We have to give them a copy of the brief to look at before they give us permission. And we can't duplicate the arguments that the other parties are making. So right now we're in the process of talking to outside counsel and coordinating with the Retirees Council. And we do think that as a labor union supporting the judge's decision, we do have unique arguments to make in support of the judge's decision, not only on the legislative history, which we think confirms that Judge Frank was correct in his interpretation, but also with regard to this idea that somehow putting a floor under the city's contributions to healthcare somehow interferes with collective bargaining. We don't agree with that position. We think it's clearly wrong. We think there are countless examples where municipal unions have supported legislation that it benefits working people and does not interfere with collective bargaining. So that's what we are hoping the court will allow us to do. I think James is going to touch on the federal legislation that Congressman Richie Torres has introduced that would prohibit public entities from forcing people into Medicare Advantage. And I think he's also going to be talking about the possibilities for legislative action in the city council. The only thing I want to point out on that is that right now, the situation is that Judge Frank says that 12-126 as written already requires the city to pay for supplemental Medicare. So that's really good. It means we, as long as we win on appeal, we won't have to change the law to require the city to pay, because it already requires that. I think that's pretty much it from me for now, and maybe I'll turn it over to Debbie.
Hi, everyone. On the organizing front, there is not a lot that's new. There have been some rallies over the summer. There have been some efforts to coordinate with groups from other states, public employees from other states who are trying to resist being forced into Medicare Advantage as well. There have been discussions with, the various coalition partners here in the city. And then August came and things got kind of calm. So as far as we are aware, the city has filed its appeal papers. It's not only said it wants to appeal, but has filed, I think they had a deadline of last Friday to file their papers in support of their appeal. So it's kind of at this point a bit of a waiting game. That's all I have to report.
Thanks,
Okay.
Debbie. Just the one thing I would add, Anne, if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
Is that the other sort of piece to be aware of is that with the help of Debbie and Bettina and Barbara Caress, we have played sort of a dual role of educating elected leaders and leaders of other unions around this issue, both the Medicare Advantage issue and the related issue of the skyrocketing out of control costs of healthcare, and coming up with ways to not put that on the backs of either in-service and retired workers. And that piece of our work is continuing. And the other thing to just be aware of is that the work is broadening now because the city has issued an RFP for a new provider for the insurance for in-service workers. And it looks like there'll be efforts to reduce costs that, if we're not successful, will fall on the backs of active members. So this, as many of us have, including several of you, have been talking about for some time, the retirees were kind of the tip of the spear, and now it looks like this struggle is broadening, and so we will be broadening the work of our little working group that's been focused on the Medicare Advantage issue primarily, and will now be encompassing the threats to the health insurance of in-service members as well.
Do we have any idea, Dean, of the timetable on the appeal and the possibility of the amicus brief, or we really don't know?
Pete is pulling up that information right now. I had not, Pete is our lawyer, our in-house lawyer, our staff lawyer. And as of last week, I hadn't seen a briefing schedule. And so we're in the process of pulling that up. And as soon as we have it, we'll let folks know what the schedule is. But,
Okay.
and that'll just set the schedule for briefs and oral argument before the appellate division. And then the court could take anywhere from a few days to several months after that to actually issue its decision.
Okay, so it looks like hopefully we'll be standing still here through to January 2024 at least, or we hope that. We don't know.
I think that's a safe guess, but that's all it is at this point. Yeah,
So,
is guesswork.
Okay. Debbie, do you have anything else? No. Okay, before we take questions, and I see, people are starting to write things in the chat, I'd like to call on James, because James is going to piggyback on some of the things that we've just heard and talk about other things that the PSC is focusing on right now, and then we'll take questions. So James, welcome again. Always great to have you. I know James has been over his head in collective bargaining and so many things. So we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us right before you have to run to 42nd Street to bargain with the chancellor.
And thank you. Thank you everybody for inviting me back. And in fact, Dean and I are both due at 42nd Street for a labor management meeting, the first of the 2 labor management meetings that we have scheduled. So I'm going to try to be brief, and I want to apologize in advance because I'm sure that I won't be able to stay long enough for a full discussion. But Let me try to touch on a few things that will suggest the state of our union before you hear from Professor Milkman on the state of the unions. And I'm always happy to be invited on the same agenda as Ruth to give her report, because once again, the report that she put out through the School of Labor and Urban Studies is really illuminating and provocative. And so I'm sorry I won't be around, Ruth, to hear your report and the discussion of it. There's a lot of interesting things going on nationally around unionization and public sector and private sector. Let me see if I can sketch a couple of areas to bring folks up to speed on what we feel is the state of our union and the state of the retiree chapters. The state of the retiree chapter is as healthy as any chapter that we have. I'll say one thing to pick up on the kind of the healthcare struggle that my colleagues were just laying out. And then, time permitting, I want to talk a little bit about the CUNY budget, the contract negotiations and the contract campaign, and also the issue of membership, PSC membership. So in one sense, and I think your characterization is right, that there's a kind of a holding pattern right now around the issue of retiree healthcare, which has been in so much of crisis. And we were glad to see that the public service retiree group prevailed for now on their litigation. And we don't know, as Dean said, we don't know exactly how long it may take for the appeals process to play itself out. I don't really think that means that there's nothing going on. I think that this gives the parties involved an opportunity to maybe reassess and to say, we don't know what's going to happen on appeal. And if I were the city, I'd be thinking about some fallback plans in case we lose in court. And if I were the MLC leadership, I'd also be thinking about some fallback plans about what in case we lose in court. And I think if I'm the public service retirees too, I'm not sure if I would be saying, well, we're our Judge Frank's decision is definitely going to be upheld on the appeal. So I'd be thinking about some contingency plans. And I say all that because I still think that something like the PSC's plan should still be in discussion. I don't really think that the bill that has been introduced by Councilmember Barron, I don't really think that's the answer. I think that it tries to do, and I want to talk about this briefly, I think it tries to do some things that are adjacent to what the PSC has been pursuing. And so I'll just speak a little bit because I know I don't want to get too wonky about it, but I know that there are people in this call who are interested in the union's disposition towards Intro 1099, which is Charles Barron's bill. Some of you know that Councilmember Barron introduced legislation that is trying to put a floor underneath the city's obligation to provide and to pay for. It doesn't say this, but we think the intention is probably to pay for health insurance for retirees that's at the same level, if not better, than what was provided back in December of 2021. The Municipal Labor Committee and the Central Labor Council have been trying to do their best to just kill that legislation by opposing it. We have not participated in that effort. We didn't join the majority in the MLC to explicitly oppose Councilmember Barron's bill. And most recently, many of the member unions in the Central Labor Council also joined kind of a comparable effort to sort of try to torpedo the bill. I've made clear that we're not interested in piling on in that project, but we also haven't come out in support of Councilmember Barron's bill. And I want to say a couple of reasons why. On the policy side and on the politics side. On the policy side, as Dean alluded to, the ruling that Judge Frank issued made clear that the current administrative code already requires the city to pay for supplemental Medicare. We don't want to pile in to provide our support for a bill that essentially says we need to win that back, because we believe that's what's in the ruling. We also feel that in a sense, it's not that the bill goes too far, but it doesn't go far enough in this regard, because it doesn't really take on a couple of key underlying issues. One is that the issue here is much broader than just retiree healthcare, and we think that that's the broad terrain now is around city supported healthcare. We know that there's a new comprehensive benefits plan that's being vetted by the technicals committee within the MLC. Next week, I should have a clearer picture of what's in that plan. But legislating narrowly around the retiree healthcare issue, our sense is that that's probably not the best way to try to resolve the issues right now. But this is where the politics come in. And I just want to be candid with folks in this room. I know we're being recorded. I know this is going to then go up on the internet, but I just want to be frank with folks as far as the conversations that we have been having with city council members, is that most of the city council members that we talk to are not eager to legislate around an issue that could then become unsettled depending on the appeals process. They are not eager to come in. And I know that there are, I think, 17 council members who are nominally supportive of this bill. They have expressed to us reservations about trying to legislate something that could potentially be unsettled or unwound depending on the outcome of the litigation. They're also, frankly, not eager to do battle with the speaker, who in this instance is supportive of the position that the mayor has taken. They might be open to legislation at a later point. Right now, the lead sponsor on the bill is a council member who in 4 months is not going to be in office anymore. And it is not clear through, at least in our discussions with the council members, who's going to take over as the lead sponsor of the bill. So I think there would need to be 34 council members, if my math is right, supporting this legislation in order for it to reach the floor and have a hearing. It doesn't seem to us like that is the direction to throw the union support behind, both for policy reasons and for politics reasons. Open to revisiting that conversation later. We feel like the most likely way forward here is to get the Adams administration actually to find the political will to not to defeat the Aetna contract, but to offer both a Medicare Advantage contract, if that's the direction that they want to go, but to also offer a cost-free option of traditional Medicare and a supplemental Medicare plan, also cost-free, and have those both options be on the floor. The administrative code now says that there needs to be at least one cost-free option. It doesn't say that there can't be two. And I think the real crux of the matter is whether the city can realize some kind of savings through this plan. And our position has been consistent. We don't want that savings to be realized on the backs of the retirees and their Medicare eligible dependents. So I think that there's an opening still, especially in the kind of holding pattern that we're in right now, where people are waiting about the outcome of the appeal on the litigation to reach that outcome. And we've had meetings over the summer with council members, including the chair of the Labor and Civil Service Committee, Carmen De La Rosa. We had a meeting about the New York Health Act with with the lead Senate sponsor, Gustavo Rivera, about the New York Health Act and the efforts that they're making to try to address the concerns from organized labor about the New York Health Act, because again, I think the long-term goal for this union has been and continues to be universal coverage and single payer. So let me stop on that and shift gears to talk a little bit about the CUNY budget, about where things stand in collective bargaining between the union and the university. And if time permits, I want to say something about membership in the PSC. So on the CUNY budget, Mayor Adams just recently at the end of last week has threatened some additional cuts. Some of you have heard the acronym, the PEGS, the Program to Eliminate the Gap. He is again threatening mid-year PEGs to all city agencies, and we have not heard that CUNY will be exempted from that. We are expecting that the Adams administration will target CUNY for additional cuts. This has been terrible, frankly, for the university. We managed in the last city budget cycle, with the great help of council, the city council, we managed to fight off sort of the worst of the threats that the Adams administration was making to these cuts. But it's not the case like it had been under de Blasio that we were fighting Cuomo, and we were assured that the de Blasio administration would continue, except in the last year when they used the federal pandemic relief funds as an excuse to push through some city cuts. The Adams administration has been relentless and brutal when it comes to funding CUNY, despite the fact that this is a mayor who has 2 degrees from CUNY. We are part of a coalition called the People's Plan. The People's Plan has been, fighting pretty vigorously, and we're going to need to do that more heading into November when he's proposing these PEG cuts to restore and keep CUNY whole. There are forecasts, as some of you know, about storm clouds ahead and budget gaps ahead, both at the state and the city level. And those, the threats of budget gaps in the out years will certainly be used to try to trim our sails on the contract side and on the budget side. So we are glad to be in coalition with the People's Plan. We're glad to be in coalition with the CUNY Rising Alliance. My concern in this round at the state level is there does not seem to be, at least as of yet, a real push, a kind of groundswell around new state revenue. And that's really going to be what's needed to try to move the needle around the CUNY budget and other progressive causes, because the governor is not in an election year this year, and we'll need new revenue. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be fighting over what's represented to us as a zero-sum game, right? The pie continues to only be this big, and we need new revenue at the state level if we're going to make the successful case that, in fact, CUNY and other important, critical, progressive needs can be met. So there are certainly plenty of corporations and billionaires that can afford to do more in terms of the revenue. So we're hopeful, and we're in conversations with NYSET, our statewide affiliate, right now, about finding ways to generate state revenue and direct that support to the public sector, including CUNY. We're also in some interesting discussions right now with the comptroller's office and the assembly about a pilot program, which is payment in lieu of taxes, so that we could generate revenue for CUNY by compelling Columbia and NYU to make payments to the city in lieu of taxes, to make payments to the city in lieu of property taxes, because despite being some of the largest landholders and real estate owners in the city of New York, and despite benefiting from public services in the city of New York, neither NYU nor Columbia, which have massive endowments, as you all know, neither of them make any property tax payments. And so we are eager to work with the comptroller's office and with folks at the state level too, to leverage some political, make some political leverage to compel both Columbia and NYU to make payments, not officially taxes, but in lieu of taxes. Why do they not have to make property tax payments? Because technically they are nonprofits, and so they use their nonprofit status to not have to pay real estate taxes. So that's well and good, but there are a lot of cities that compel their large universities and hospitals and other non-for-profits to make payments in lieu of taxes. So at the city level, we're hopeful to push that work, and you'll be hearing more about us on that. Another piece of the budget, kind of the CUNY budget report, is that enrollment at CUNY has started to bounce back, which is a good thing. It's a good thing for everybody. It's a good thing for the bean counters at CUNY Central that want to know how much revenue they're going to get from putting rear ends in seats. And it's also a good thing from those of us who are teaching students to know that students are coming back. The numbers are certainly, at this point in fall 2023, they're nowhere near what they were pre-pandemic, but they've turned the corner, and in most, if not all, of the colleges, the enrollment numbers are resuming, which is great. We really need the governor to make good, and we need the university to hold the governor to the commitment that she made in her very first State of the State address when she took office in January 2022, which was to massively expand the operating aid to both SUNY and CUNY, and we need to hold her to that, and we need the university to hold her to that, rather than to just cry poverty and to say, enrollment's been down, the storm clouds are gathering on the on the city and state budgets on the out years. We need them to be very aggressive partners in pursuing, really, frankly, not just the funding that the governor promised, but the funding that the university really needs to run its operations and to settle a strong contract with the faculty and staff. There have not been tuition increases. That's a good thing. There are no tuition increases in the preliminary budget requests that CUNY has made for fiscal year 2025. That is a good thing too. And CUNY's fiscal 2025 budget request is very strong. They continue to make requests for hundreds of millions of dollars more than the previous year's enacted budget. That's good. Some of the requests are in line with the new deal for CUNY. Requests for additional full-time faculty, requests for professionalization of the compensation for our adjunct faculty, requests for new full-time lines for academic advisors and mental health counselors. That's all to the good, but the proof is in the pudding, and we need to see them going up there, right, and fighting just like we do, and the CUNY Rising Alliance does every year for that funding. The last thing I want to say about CUNY and the budget. Time and again, we see this, that when CUNY gets the additional funds that, from the state and the city, that's good. We celebrate it, but then we need to hold them to using it for the priorities that are aligned with the union priorities. So for example, a couple of years ago, CUNY got $53 million in new operating aid for full-time faculty hiring. That was fantastic. We fought for it. We're glad they got it. They turned around and they used that $53 million to hire predominantly faculty members who are off the tenure track. That is not good, right? So they have hired approximately 4 out of every 5 of their new hires has been on lecturer positions. Now, lecturers are fantastic, but CUNY gets a big bang for their buck in terms of teaching, and the long-term effect of that is going to be to erode the scholarly and research agenda and commitment that the university provides, and that's important both for students and for the research that we produce for the public more broadly. So that rate of hiring full-timers off the tenure track and off the professorial lines is really unsustainable in terms of the mission of the university. So I'll be brief in what I want to say about contract negotiations. I'll drop into the chat if I can. I want to provide you with a link to what the bargaining agenda for the union looks like and what the strategic action plan looks like for this fall into January for winning a good contract. We have an ambitious bargaining agenda that was really developed through dialogue with our members and even retiree leadership, who sent us an excellent list of things that the retirees would like to see in the contract negotiations. Believe it or not, it took a demonstration outside of the Wall Street offices of William Thompson, the chair of the board, to bring CUNY finally to the bargaining table. We have been at the bargaining table working hard all summer. We had 6 bargaining sessions to date, starting in late June. I would say at this point, I think it's fair to say that the parties are still pretty far apart, but we do not have an economic offer on the table. So a lot of what CUNY has brought forward have been non-economic demands, such as, for example, how to make it easier for them to fire us, how to make it harder for us to achieve job security, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to consider yourselves all invited to bargaining sessions. Several members of the retiree chapter have attended bargaining sessions. We've had excellent discussions with our members. I think we've had over 140 PSC members come to and attend bargaining sessions. It's been really lively. We've had an opportunity to talk with them during caucuses, which are breaks in bargaining. Dean, thanks for putting that in the chat. And then we have really good debriefs after the sessions are over with our members. So the criteria, the qualifier that we have basically been having monthly orientation sessions for folks who are not familiar with PSC CUNY bargaining. So we require anyone who is interested in attending a bargaining session to first attend an orientation. They're offered on Zoom. The next one's actually going to be tomorrow at 12:30. We can put a link to actually, I think it's within that link you have there. You can sign up, you can register for an orientation session to bargaining. We want to make sure everybody's familiar with what to expect and what the sort of PSC rules of the room are for bargaining. The bargaining session themselves are always in person. We don't bargain remotely with CUNY. We either meet at their house or here at the PSC. Last thing, state of our union. Our membership in the PSC has sagged during the pandemic, but we are starting to bring that back. Membership is a big part of what allows us to do what we do. Membership is our revenue. Our revenue at the union is our membership dues. So it's really important that we respond to the challenges of the pandemic in eroding our membership by ramping back up. And we've done that. We had a lot of retirement and attrition during the pandemic. And so that has been part of climbing back. Our membership campaign has been intentional about trying to climb back up and move our numbers, have conversations in substantive terms about why it's really important, especially during a contract campaign, but not only during the contract campaign, why it's very important to have high levels of membership in the union. Since the spring, we've rebounded. We've been able to move the needle a lot, including a real focused campaign on professional staff over the summer. Professional staff are on the campuses more regularly in the summer than our faculty. And then our activist members and our organizing department did a real targeted push with the return to campus, with new hires. New hires, we're required by law to be able to have a touch with our new hires. And we managed to, over the course between the summer and these new hire orientations, we have managed to bring in, I think, close to 300 now new members of the union, which is a really good thing. We're not done yet. We're going to continue that focus on new membership throughout the fall semester. So we're being helped in this by NYSET. NYSET has a member organizing institute, which is training our members helping to train them to do outreach, to bring folks in who are not new members, and also giving us the data to be able to support that work. If anyone here, I'll just wrap up with this. If anyone here does not contribute to Vote Cope, I want to make sure that we have a follow-up with you about the importance of contributions to Vote Cope. Vote Cope is a program that allows us to do the kind of work that our membership dues are not eligible for funding. So our legislative and political work is really critically grounded by the resources that we have through the Vote Cope program. And I know that our Vote Cope coordinator, Liz Stevenson, would be glad to be invited. Great, thank you, Anne, to attend a meeting and talk about the vitality of the Vote Cope work that we are doing. So let me stop there. And again, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to hear from you. It's always good to be here with the Retirees chapter. So thanks.
And you're muted.
I specifically muted myself and kept telling myself, and you're going to unmute, and you're going to unmute, but you know, memories are short. We have about 10 minutes. Dean and James have to leave, but questions. I see 3 hands. I see Barbara Becker, Irving Markowitz, and Marcia Newfields. So let's take you in those orders, and please try to keep your questions or comments to a minute. Thanks. Barbara
Yeah.
Becker.
Yeah. Question, is the PSC contributing funds to the main legal challenge? I know in the past we were not, and I'm wondering if that has changed.
Barbara, we're not right now. I mean, I think where we feel like we can be the most helpful is by filing the amicus brief that Dean was speaking about.
Right, but I'll say this later, but lots of individuals have been donating money. I know that for sure. Okay, Barbara, is that it? Okay, Irving Markowitz, unmute, please.
Sorry about the video. I don't know what I did wrong. 2 questions. One is, the last time I had asked whether it would be possible in terms of membership to have membership in the Retirees Association as the default position for anybody retiring. Has anybody looked into that, and is that a possibility?
Irving, I'm sorry, I missed the middle part of your question. To have the retirees
As a default position, in other words, you retire
right,
and you automatically are part of us.
Right.
so to continue automatic dues deduction and to continue automatic membership unless the retiree takes the action in the other direction. That's what you're saying?
Yes, but it might also be possible that what would inhibit that from taking place is the collection of dues. So that was part of my question, whether or not it might be possible to have it as a default position if we were willing to have dues as a separate issue.
Right. I really appreciate the question, and I would love to make that happen, but I would need, we would have to check with our legal and our membership departments to see if that could be made to work.
Okay,
Certainly make things a lot easier for us.
well, it would certainly make us a lot more powerful. But Marcia,
Well, I had a second question.
no, Irving, I'm gonna move to Marcia now. Put the
Okay.
question,
Why?
put it in the chat, please. I'm sorry. Marcia, you're on mute. Marcia, you're on mute.
Right, Marcia, try
Okay.
unmuting again.
Okay, I got it. I couldn't.
Okay, we
unmute.
have Marcia.
Okay, two things. One, of course, I have to say that adjuncts are not covered. They are not considered, they are nameless. When you say retirees, it does not include adjuncts because in terms of health insurance. So I know that I've said that 7,000 times before, but it's sort of a misconception. Oh, the city retirees are getting screwed. True enough, and I've supported every move to do this, but in that sentence, it is never mentioned the full-time city employees. I'm sure there are a ton of part-time city employees in the other unions, because all the unions have taken, not the unions, all the corporations have taken advantage of the gig economy, and the gig economy prevents them from giving benefits and beyond service, blah, blah, blah. So I just want that in there. The other point I want to make, I'm a member of COPE, of course, and can we, through COPE, endorse certain political candidates who will, in the miracle of miracles, overturn Janus or be favorable to labor? Is that part of COPE's venue or whatever, territory?
Absolutely. That's exactly what COPE is meant to do, is to recruit and to get into office and then to hold accountable candidates who share our labor values and our progressive values. Absolutely. And Marcia, on your first point, I'm glad you raised it. It's always a good qualifier. And as I think you know, one of the pieces of our bargaining agenda is to expand retirement benefits for contingent, for adjunct faculty. Thank you.
Okay, I think Mike Frank, you'll be the last question. Can we unmute Mike? Or can Mike unmute himself?
Try again, Mike.
Got it.
Okay, okay.
On the latest RFP, can you give us some details about this? So this is to a fallback plan, I take it, to cut costs at the expense of the in-service people. Can you give us some detail about this? And I assume this is supported by the MLC.
Mike, thanks.
Mike, I'll help respond to this. The city proposed, really going back a year and a half, wanting to find some ways of saving additional money from in-service employee health plans. So they issued an RFP, as Dean mentioned, and have received, and their goal in issuing this RFP was to save $1 billion. So it's a little hard to imagine, I'll just editorialize for one sentence. It's a little hard to imagine how the city can save $1 billion on health insurance without making the health insurance less good for in-service employees. The MLC is working with the city in reviewing responses to this RFP. PSC is not fully informed, as James alluded to, yet what all the details are, if the details are available. We do know that there were 3 major applications that were under review. I think that's been reduced to 2. We are hopeful that we will get, now that it's September and the start of the year, we are hopeful we will be hearing more details. The unions are very firm in the position that they do not want in-service employees to have to pay premiums. People currently do not pay a premium for HIP and do not pay a premium for GHI. Some people have some riders that they pay for, but and if HIP will remain in place such as it is, but this is to replace, in essence, the GHI Empire Blue Cross plan. That plan will be replaced. Emblem has submitted a bid. I believe Aetna has submitted a bid. And probably those are the two primary bids that are under consideration. I think Emblem has submitted a bid with a different hospital contracting entity. So that's the extent of the details we have at the moment. And I sit on one of the MLC committees that is sort of tangential to this review, and we've gotten very few details.
Okay, well, I don't know, Debbie, if you want to hang around. I know Debbie's probably on tenterhooks. She's expecting a new granddaughter any minute now. And Dean, are you a grandpa now?
I am indeed. I am the grandfather of a 2-week-old boy named Leo.
Well, congratulations, a boy and a girl. Okay, we'll make a shitta for those of you who know what that is. Okay, and I'm sure other people have happy news as well. Okay, thank you very much, Dean and James. It seems, I know they go from one meeting to the next. I give the chancellor hell, say it nicely, but do what you have to do, and we'll see you soon. If you'll
Thanks,
indulge,
Sam.
yeah, thank you
Thanks,
very
everyone.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. If you'll indulge me for about 10 minutes, I'm going to stay at the local level and give you a little report on what things are looking like in our own chapter, looking back at the past year and looking ahead. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Ann Friedman. I'm the chapter chair. I very much want to welcome new retirees to the chapter. I work in concert with Diane Mena, our vice chair, and Bonnie Nelson, our secretary, and the three of us form your leadership team. And if there is one word I think that applies to how our chapter functions, it's collectivism. And that collectivism extends beyond the three women at the top of your executive slate, but to an executive council of about 25 members whose names are not just on letterhead, but who are activists, who bring collectively hundreds of years of experience of leadership and organizing to this work. And we all work together. And I know that I could not do this job without all of them. And finally, we have Ava Farkas, our staff member. She is staffing the meeting today. Ava, among her many duties as with our chapter, she has many duties as the coordinator of organizing in coalitions, and she helps ensure that we run an efficient shop. And even better is her youthful spirit and optimism, knowing that we can make a difference by organizing together and always telling us so. And we appreciate that. So the real strength in our chapter is members, and I'm happy to report that we're very close to 3,000 members. And Denise, our membership chair, tells me she's still processing membership forms, and we should easily surpass 3,000. We gained about 100 members this year, which I think is a pretty good showing. We're up from the last 2 years. For those of you who are new, we're a full-fledged chapter of the PSC with delegates to the policymaking bodies. We have voting rights. We are members of NYSET and AFT, our state and national parent chapters. We have our own webpage. lovingly tended to by Bill Friedheim. Somebody asked about Bill in the chat. Bill is doing much better. He's still in rehab. He is progressing, and he is determined to come back to us very soon. So he sends his regards, and we send him our regards. With the click of a button on the webpage, you can read the history of the Medicare Advantage struggle, watch and listen to recordings of our chapter meetings, get your questions answered from our stellar Q&A page on Medicare Advantage. I don't know that any other union has that. And recently, Bonnie, our secretary, prepared for us a guide to choosing a supplemental health plan should we have to do so, how to estimate costs, how to predict our needs. And so if the worst comes to pass, at least we can be as ready as we can be. The Retiree chapter has its own newsletter, Turning the Page. It's edited by a newsletter committee. We have a program committee, a membership committee, and we have our own anti-racism committee. Retirees participate in PSC-wide committees and working groups, such as the Legislation Committee, the Environmental and Social Justice Working Group, the Social Safety Net group, and the Pension Committee, and the newly formed PSC-wide Pension Committee has been dormant for many years, and it's thanks to our Vice Chair, Diane Mena, who really was the real driver in getting that up and running again. We're members of a union-wide MA Plus team, we call it, where research and strategy take place around the proposed Aetna plan and privatization of healthcare. We benefit there from the contributions of our healthcare experts, Debbie Bell and Barbara Caress, and the political savvy of our executive director, our president, our past president, our legislative director, and our welfare fund staff. Of course, we do not work alone, and we can't work alone. And I want to point to a few of the activities around our Medicare struggle with other organizations. Now, someone asked, or a number of you have asked, about the New York Organization of Public Service Retirees. We know individuals from our union have been active with that group. Many of you write to me and keep me up to date and ask me questions. And I know that many of us have contributed financially to fund the lawsuits because we know that lawyers and legal fees are high. With our lobbying calls to city council members, circulating and signing of petitions, letter writing, testifying, and gathering at rallies and marches, we're joined by activists across the city who share our goals. We liaison with at least 5 retiree organizations and 5 more advocacy groups focusing on the issues of healthcare. Very specifically, some highlights: we were among over 200 activists who testified on changing the code, the administrative code 12-126, and we had a strong cadre of supporters outside that hearing. People waited up to 12 hours to speak. With CROC, the Cross Union Retiree Organizing Committee, we organized an emergency demonstration outside City Hall at the end of March to tell the mayor to choose option C. I don't know if you remember, choose option C, but option C was in the Aetna contract and would have allowed the mayor to maintain our premium-free senior care. He did not choose that. At the same rally, we marched around City Hall and delivered over 2,000 constituent letters demanding that the mayor do the right thing. As recently as last week, 5 chapter members joined with 5 CROC allies in a visit to Congressman Dan Goldman's legislative director, and they carried with them an excellent fact sheet compiled by our secretary, Bonnie Nelson. And the group spoke about the threat that Medicare Advantage poses to traditional Medicare. Well, we're working overtime, overtime to address the healthcare crisis. We've kept our decade-long tradition of holding monthly meetings on topics of interest to our members, providing a rich variety of political, cultural, and social issue presentations with speakers from within and outside of CUNY. Looking back, we had some really great programs. I'm not going to detail them all because I'm running out of time. If you look at the website, you can remind yourself of the titles of all the great programs that we did, and both in the fall and the spring. And this is, in addition, we did a couple of walking tours that were connected to our presentations. We had a presentation on the Asian American community, followed by a walking tour and lunch in Chinatown. And we had a walking tour of the Lower East Side of Lower Manhattan, conducted by Penny Lewis. And I heard that the participants had a fabulous lunch at Faunce's Tavern afterwards. Looking forward, just a couple of things. Just this Thursday, the opening session of a book discussion series that is starting, being sponsored by our anti-racism committee, and about 15 chapter members will read and discuss over the coming months the book 400 Souls by Ibram X. Kendi. In October, we're going to bring back a postponed program from last year, looking back at the November 22 elections when we lost some Democratic state seats in the legislature. We have a program on climate change, another program on climate change and activism. We're going to be talking about academic freedom with Ellen Schrecker, and also somebody who's been fighting on the ground at the University of Florida, Katie Rainwater. We have other goals. Primary is to monitor the local healthcare situation, but as you heard today, we need to broaden our scope to the state and national level. And here at PSC, our in-service colleagues are going to be facing the same kinds of challenges that we have with healthcare. And I hope that, we've learned some lessons over the last 3 years when we prepare for that fight. And we should be preparing now. I don't know. I mean, the union should be preparing now. I don't know what's in the works. We need to increase our membership. Our numbers have gone up, but of all the retirees this past year, only half have joined. So we need you to fill out your invoices or join online, send in your checks, and go after your colleagues. We hope this year to increase the diversity of our members with an eye toward bringing in more HEOs and CLTs and people of color. And we'll continue to engage with the PSC in their campaign. So I want to, and we're looking to have an in-person luncheon on January 8th at the new PSC offices, if the health situation allows. We are discussing whether or not we should bring back some in-person meetings. And I'll just close by thanking you for the support and the encouragement you've given all of us. So my head and my heart and my soul are with you, and I look forward to another lively and productive year. And with that, we're going to make a quick switch to the national scene. And I'm going to introduce Ruth Milkman when I can find the bio, which I seem to have misplaced. Ruth Milkman has spoken to us before. Ruth Milkman is a distinguished professor of history and sociology at the Grad Center and at the School of Labor Studies. She's a national expert on unionization and union trends. We've had to cut her short in past seasons because of the Medicare stuff, but hopefully we have enough time to hear what she has to say. She's given us a link to the report if we want to read it, and we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So Ruth, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, I apologize. I don't have the names of your books in front of me.
Oh, don't worry. That's okay. Anybody who's interested can easily find me
Yeah.
on the
So
web.
here's Ruth Milkman. Welcome.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Anne asked me to, as I've done in previous years, to just share with you some of the highlights of the annual report that we at the School of Labor and Urban Studies prepare each Labor Day on the State of the Union. So that's what I'm going to do. And I prepared a PowerPoint with some of the highlights, but I'm also very happy to hear your thoughts and questions. How much time do we have for the whole discussion, Anne?
You mean your presentation and discussion? I
Yeah.
would say 55 minutes.
Okay, so until 3, perfect. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
until 3.
So I will not take up nearly that long in my presentation, and then, but if there's something unclear, just interrupt me if you want. Otherwise, we can just have a discussion after the PowerPoint. So let me share my screen.
So you want me to call on people if they raise their hands?
Sure, that would be great. Can you see my screen? Let me.
Yes.
Okay, so that's just the cover. My co-author on this year's report is Joseph Vandernaut, who's a graduate student at the CUNY Graduate Center in sociology and actually writing a fascinating dissertation on public sector labor history. So, but he's not here today, so you just got me. So as you will not be surprised to see this first graph, which just shows the kind of relentless decline of private sector union density over the years. This only goes back to 2003, but I think you all know that where this, there's some bouncing around, but the long-term trend is downward. Of course, if you go back further, it's a much steeper decline. So things have somewhat leveled off, but as you know, we have a pretty horrendous situation with only 6% of the United States private sector unionized, and here in New York, it's roughly double that. Nothing really new there, but it is remarkable in the face of all the media reports of new organizing, and we're all aware of what's happening with all that at Starbucks, Amazon, Trader Joe's, etc. Of course, part of it is that there's been a tremendous management resistance to those campaigns. Almost none of them have gotten any kind of recognition, much less a collective bargaining agreement. But the bigger issue, even if that weren't the case, the numbers don't really add up to enough to move the needle on private sector union density, at least not so far. So that's not a happy story, but maybe we're at the beginning of something that will turn that around. I can't say I'm counting on it, but I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts on that. Okay, and the next slide, though, might be, see if I can get this to work. Oh, so I just said this, that the recent organizing hasn't really done the trick. Delay. This is just repeating what I already said, I'm sorry. So the third bullet, though, is worth a moment. I kind of first heard this analysis from a journalist that some of you may be familiar with, Harold Meyerson at the American Prospect, has been pointing this out recently, and I think he's right, that in contrast to Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, REI, etc., where the resistance is unrelenting, unionism among this new generation, which is what it is, of young workers who are organizing, has gotten much more traction in sectors where it's harder to replace the workers. In both cases, although being a barista may not require a college education, most of the people who do it, in fact, are at least have some college. Many of them are college graduates, in some cases well beyond college graduates. And same thing is true at Apple stores, and REI, et cetera, hires those kind of folks. But on the other hand, those workers are easily replaced, and those tend to be quite high turnover jobs. In contrast, if you look at some of these other occupations listed in the slide, journalists who've been organizing quite extensively recently, both in online news outlets and on conventional ones, museum workers, nurses, these have been going on for a while, interns and residents who've been on the move quite a bit recently, and of course, graduate student workers and adjuncts in the higher education sector. Here, there's been a lot of activity, and it has gotten much more traction, and they have won contracts in many cases, much more often than in those sort of Fortune 500 iconic brand companies. So that's interesting. And Harold points out that likely the reason for that is that it's not so easy to just fire everybody in a hospital or in a university, for that matter, and just hire people off the street like you can do with a Starbucks or that kind of situation. So that's a little more hopeful. But again, the numbers are not large enough to really move the needle. Again, all this activity recently, or the vast majority of it anyway, and this is something I'm really interested in and would love to hear your thoughts on. It's been led by a new generation of labor activists who are mostly relatively young, certainly compared to us in this call, but really 20s and 30s mostly. And many of them are college educated. My own view is that what's driving it, to at least one of the drivers, is the disparity between the expectations that this demographic group has had for the labor market and the reality they confront, especially after the Great Recession. But there are other things too. So just to give you an idea that this is something new, you've probably all seen these polls showing tremendous public support for unionism in recent years, which is something we haven't seen for a while. It's especially strong among younger workers and even more so among young college graduates. So, that's something to watch. Now I have some bad news about New York, which is this other graph about the public sector. And this was not something I at least was expecting to see. And I have only some speculative ideas about why it is. But notice this dip. The yellow line is New York City. Public sector density is much higher than in the private sector, roughly 33% or something like that. If I move this, I can see the numbers. Yeah, 33% nationally, and roughly double that in New York State. Whoops, sorry. In New York City, however, notice this fairly dramatic decline in the last few years, 56%. Down from about 70%. So that's pretty, striking. And I can't give you, the data we use for this don't offer a ready explanation, but I do have some ideas about what might be behind it, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. One possibility is the delayed effect of Janus. We all know what that was about, combined with the pandemic lockdowns, which made it a lot harder to sign up new members starting in the last few years. So that may be one factor that we're, bleeding in public sector units membership for that reason. I have heard from some of our colleagues in the PSC, Penny in particular, that this has been an issue, even with a dedicated effort to try to sign up new workers, that it's been much more difficult under these circumstances. I wonder if something you've all seen, the same reporting I have, I'm sure, about the people leaving the city might also have an impact here. And so this kind of raises another point that is important to understand in looking at these numbers. all the numbers I've shown you are based on the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics current population survey, which is the only national survey that regularly asks questions about whether people are union members. But when we say that New York City union membership has gone down, that does not mean jobs in New York City. It means people who live in the 5 boroughs. That's a big difference, right? So many people commute from outside the 5 boroughs to jobs in the city. That's not what the data are about. They're based on the residency of the applicant. So if it's true that a lot of people have left the city and are commuting, maybe they still have their job in New York, but they're living somewhere else, that would be reflected in that dip that you saw. That's one possibility. And then I think, and that would reduce the numerator, right? The density number is made up of the number of total jobs there are reported in the city and the number of people who live in the city who say they're union members. Then there's this other possibility, which again, I don't have any numbers on this, but we all know that especially at the height of the pandemic, there is a lot of, there are many employers who are hiring people outside the boundaries of the unionized workforce. Travel nurses is the most obvious, especially at the height of the pandemic. There's a shortage of nurses. Many employers will hire per diem nurses, that kind of thing, and maybe other healthcare workers too. Provisionals, as they're called in city employment, is another. So all those things could be contributing to this as well. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this too, but those are the things that occur to me. Anyway, it's sort of an alarming situation because that's been the one stable sector historically in recent times. So on a happier note, in the, every year in these reports, we do a special feature on some topic. And this year we decided to do it on higher education, having been impressed by all the activity around the country, the various strikes and so on, and also a lot of new organizing. And so I'm going to just share the last couple slides are about that. So you all, in CUNY, of course, adjuncts have been organized for quite a long time. This isn't really a new thing, but around the country, there's been a big uptick in organizing among both contingent faculty adjuncts and, they have various other job titles, and graduate student workers as well. And you can see here some numbers. Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this. And you're seeing the Zoom pictures, or they're like in the way of what I'm trying to look at while I talk to you. So here you can see that actually a lot of that organizing happened a while back, but it continues to notch upward. So that's just unionization of faculty in the United States. The growth in units is what you see in the bar graph. And then the red line is the cumulative number of units. And then among graduate students, though, we've seen a much sharper rise in the last few years. I think you've all read about this in various places. It's, this is something that's sort of happening. And they're not all graduate students, actually. Some of them are undergraduates, like Grinnell College is one of the more high profile cases of that, where they don't have graduate students there. I don't believe in the student workers organized themselves into a union. There's also been a big uptick in strikes in these two groups. I think we all watched the Rutgers strike across the river recently. And of course, the University of California was a fairly spectacular one this past year with the biggest academic worker strike in history, I believe, involving about almost 50,000 workers. And the big innovation there was that they, for the first time, included student research workers as well as teaching assistants, and they expanded to include more of the people in STEM fields in the teaching as well, and they also included postdocs. So that was sort of a big moment. So anyway, that's perhaps a little more hopeful. Now, of course, these groups do fit into that point I was trying to make earlier about the that it's, this is a group where it's a lot of them are public sector, but even in the private sector, this is a group that it's a lot harder for management to just like blow it off when they have an election and win collective bargaining rights. And so it's been more successful than in some of the more high profile campaigns in private companies. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share. And I'd love to hear your questions and comments in whatever time remains.
Well, thank you, Ruth. I hope that we'll have a very lively discussion. I emailed Ruth, I think it might have been on Friday, to tell her that on the delegate assembly list, many of you probably don't know this if you're not on the delegate assembly list, though you may know it. On certain campuses, I think Baruch and BMCC, maybe somebody knows more than I do about this, but there's been a virulent anti-union campaign with people standing outside the colleges, giving out literature and so forth. And I don't know if this is happening nationally or not, but it certainly got people very, very upset. And it certainly coincidentally timed with the fact that our leaders are in collective bargaining. So, but I'm going to call on others and we can get into a discussion. I see Erwin Yelowitz and then Mike Frank.
Right. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Irvin.
And thank you for your annual report, which is always very useful and interesting. On the private density question, why is it that the efforts to organize at Starbucks and Amazon and the like are being done on the basis of individual places rather than union-wide or company-wide? That is, organizing that's been most successful in the past has been when a company at large is organized by a union, often after a very bitter campaign. But what we see here is that individual units of a huge company are being organized. And of course, it doesn't affect, if you organize 300 Starbucks units, it doesn't affect the other 6,500. And even though there are franchises involved here, most of Starbucks, for example, is owned by Starbucks.
Right.
And so why are unions using this individual location approach, which seems to me is a very difficult one to follow?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't really know the answer, except that the Starbucks thing started, as some of you probably already know, in one store in Buffalo, New York, and then there were like all these copycat campaigns around the country that ensued, and it was initially a sort of bottom-up thing that just kind of emerged, although it's come out that one of the leaders of that effort in Buffalo was actually a Salt, who planned it ahead. But still, that raises your question. I guess the answer I suspect would be the answer, though you'd really have to ask the architects of these campaigns to be sure, is that it's really hard to organize 5,000 Starbucks at the same time, right? But as you point out, doing it one at a time has its problems. I think the momentum might have continued. It's sort of leveled off now. Might have continued had it not been, though, for the enormous resistance. Like for a while, it was snowballing after the, starting off in Buffalo and then finding, imitators nearby and then gradually all over the country. So I do think the bigger problem is the very sort of intransigent resistance of management. Some of you might have watched, as I did, the Howard Schultz's testimony when he was hauled before Congress by Bernie Sanders to talk about this and insisted that he's not doing anything illegal, which, anybody who looks at the situation would have to disagree with that. They're just not budging. And the same thing is true at these other companies. There's just no, and this isn't really new, let's be honest. I mean, in the private sector for a long time, in private corporations, the kind of standard modus operandi is to fight any union campaign that emerges on your doorstep by all means available, including hiring Littler Mendelsohn and its competitors. So, and that's what they've been doing. So this isn't really news exactly. The more surprising thing is that there's been so much activity despite that approach, right? But it's, anyway, this is one of the weaknesses, is that it is store by store, or in the case of Amazon, warehouse by warehouse, Apple store by store, et cetera, all these retail places. I don't know if there's really an alternative given the limited resources that are being devoted to this stuff, but it is strikingly different from the history that you know better than I do of how other companies were organized in the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. Thank you. All right, Mike Frank, and then I see Dave Cuddlechuck. Mike.
Ruth, two questions, related questions, but I'm going to sneak two questions in here. Is there a correlation between the level of strikes, the number of strikes, and union density? It would seem that common sense would say there is, all right? That when unions are on the move, fighting and winning, that will draw, other people in other areas to unionize. And related to that, the Taylor law, as you know, forbids striking for the public sector workers here in New York City. Some time ago, the actor Cynthia Nixon ran against Andrew Cuomo, and she proposed that that part of the Taylor law be eliminated. Well, Cuomo thought it was a terrible idea, quote, and de Blasio, Democratic mayor, also thought it was bad, okay? Equally, the DC 37 and the UFT also nixed the idea, did not like it. Okay, so how do you explain that? Right, that if in fact there is a correlation between strike activities and density, and there's an aversion to strikes on the part of some union leaders at least, and I'll stop there. Okay.
All right. Well, so the Taylor law, of course, only affects the public sector here in New York. There are states where public sector workers can legally strike. There are illegal strikes of public sector workers now and then, right, et cetera. There has been an uptick in strike activity in the last couple of years. Actually starts in 2018 with those red state teacher strikes, some of which were technically illegal, by the way, but remember those. But in the private sector, we've seen them in the pandemic period and since, driven, in my view, often by the realities of the labor shortage, because, strike activity fell off in the private sector very, very dramatically starting in the early 80s. And that was when private companies started routinely hiring so-called permanent replacements for strikers. That was actually legal long before, but they didn't do it so often prior to the 80s. And I don't have a chart to show you, but you can look it up anywhere. It just kind of falls off a cliff in the 80s. And now we're seeing a slight uptick, which I think reflects the labor shortage. In other words, think about that there was this in fall of 2021, I believe it was, or maybe 22, sorry. People called it Striketober. Remember that? The strikes at John Deere and Kellogg's cereal and those were long unionized workers. That didn't reflect new organizing of any kind, but they're big companies. So John Deere, for example, has about 10,000 employees who are on strike. Where are they going to find 10,000 replacement workers in a tight labor market? It's just not really an option. And so they were able to strike and win quite a bit. Just more recently at UPS, we saw they didn't go on strike in the end, but they threatened to. And well, that was an extreme case where they had a very unusual amount of leverage because of the character of that industry and its rapid growth, and that UPS is the only unionized company, et cetera. So they, that was a kind of unique case. But still, in this labor market, you can see where private sector strikes, why it makes sense that there have been more of them. But there are strikes and strikes, right? So some strikes are correlated, as you said, with organizing activity. We haven't seen that much of that. Like these different, most of the strikes have been among long unionized workers. Somebody in the chat, Renata has been asking about the writer's strike, and I'm wearing my t-shirt right now, and the actor strike in the TV industry. Those are a little different. That's not a labor shortage story. They're trying to catch up with artificial intelligence, et cetera. You all are familiar with that, I'm sure. But the fact that it's hard to replace workers makes it much easier for those kinds of strikes in general to proceed. We'll see if the auto workers carry out their threat to strike at the end of this week. I don't think they have the same leverage as UPS, but again, you know, they have more than they would have pre-pandemic. So that's part of it. But keep in mind that there are strikes and strikes. So there's the public sector, private sector, legal disparities. There are many strikes in the post-1980s period that are basically employer initiated events. A contract comes to an end. The employer makes an offer they know the union won't accept because it takes away everybody's health care, for example. I hate to push buttons that are close to home, but you know what I'm saying. We've seen this over and over again. Think of the Detroit News. That's one of the most famous ones, where the goal of the employer is to destroy the union by provoking a strike. So that's a strike, but it's not really what you're talking about. So, you know, and if the unemployment rate continues to inch up, I think that leverage will go away and we may be back to where we were. So I don't really, I mean, there is a lot of interest in labor now among both, and a lot of anger among workers for good reasons in terms of feeling left out of all the pandemic profiteering and so on. That's what's driving it in autos, for example, right now. But, you know, to win a strike, you have to have real leverage, and that is not always the case these days, absent a labor shortage. So I'm not really answering your question, but I see these as two distinct things. And again, like the higher education strikes are not all of them, but most of them are public sector events. So that's in states where it is not illegal to strike, like New Jersey, like California. So that's a little different where they're, you know, it's more of almost a political thing. In terms of changing the Taylor law, well, I mean, I think it's almost goes with the job that a mayor or a governor in the state would prefer to keep the law the way it is, you know, because they don't want strikes, which are very disruptive from their point of view. I can't imagine our current mayor would welcome a change in that law, or our current governor, but there's nothing new there, right? That's been the case probably since the Taylor law became law.
Right. Thank you. Okay, Dave Cuddlechuck.
Ruth, I was curious, I was surprised in your report about the apparent dip in the New York City public unionism. You suggested as a hypothesis, I mean, first, it doesn't seem like that there's been a drop, and at one level. And another level, I know that people can't afford to live in New York now. And think about all the people who moved to Hoboken and Fort Lee and other parts of New Jersey, at least, and maybe Yonkers, who, you know, just get out of the city, but they were actually working in the city.
Yes, and so that's an artifact of the way the data are collected. It's not really.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether, I know there's data collected by the federal government on the standard metropolitan statistical areas, like the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area.
Yeah.
I wondered if it was possible to check for union membership for people, looking at the people who live in that area who work in New York, or that is to say, take the union members and then check back if they live in the standard metropolitan statistical area, in which case it may not, you may find that dip goes away. I hope so, by the way.
That's a great
I
point.
wondered if that could be looked at. It's not easy. I mean, because
No, we do have the number for this year. I don't have it in front of me for the going back a few years, but it's in between the state level and the city one. So it's about 61% for the period that 56%. So that's consistent with what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
But I do think it's also true that Janus may be part of the mix. I see people explain what that is, and that, you know, that people are not new employees are not signing up to pay dues. To become members. So it's probably some combination of all those things.
Oh yeah, I just thought it could check out a hypothesis that I think the dip doesn't reflect the reality of unionism in New York City. So
yes, I believe that too. Although I think some of it's like a combination.
Oh, absolutely. And somebody raised in the chat a moment before I spoke about immigration and the question of people who are working in the unions, also who don't pay dues via Janus. As you said, so those are all things. Anyway, very interesting report. Thank you.
If you look at the whole report, we do look at immigrants versus US born. over time, the gap in union density has actually declined. But the main thing is that I don't know what first generation Americans means here, but because that sometimes refers to immigrants, sometimes to their kids. The foreign-born workers are much less likely to be employed in the public sector at all for various reasons, sometimes language, sometimes citizenship, whatever. So, which is another, anyway. So, but despite that, the kind of, there used to be a big gap between immigrant unionization rates and US born, and it's narrowed quite a bit, not just in New York, but nationally. So that, it all reflects. So if you look at the full report, if you're interested in all these numbers, we look at it for a bunch of different demographic groups, by gender, by race, by nativity, excuse me, etc. Age. You can't really read off interest in unionization from those numbers, because so much of it is driven by where people happen to be employed. So for example, that the public sector is much more heavily unionized, even with this recent dip, than the private sector. If you're less likely to be in the public sector because you're foreign born, then, that by itself makes, even if you're very pro-union, you might not show up there. African Americans are overrepresented in the public sector. They do happen to have more pro-union attitudes too, but it's more the fact of where you work, right? So it's kind of complicated, all this. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I see Francis and Palmer Tome.
Yes, thanks, Ruth. Some of my questions you've answered already, but I'm wondering about some union leaders. They seem to settle strikes better than others, like the FedEx and the UPS. And it doesn't matter how many members they have, like the union members, I think they're over 160,000 members in the writer's strike. Yet they're using different methods. The leaders are using different methods to settle strikes. And some strikes seem to last longer than others. And I think they're just placating either the members or the companies that they're fighting against.
It really varies from union to union. So, for example, in this recent UPS situation, we have a brand new union president of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, who was eager to, who was, elected with the help of dissidents in Teamsters for Democratic Union and other folks like that, and was eager to demonstrate his commitment to getting a really good deal for the members. And I think he succeeded, actually, in this case, without having to go on strike, but by threatening one. Similarly, in the auto industry, we have a new union president, a little different in terms of how he came into power, but still there's a certain muscle flexing going on there. In contrast, like that John Deere strike I mentioned before, there, it was actually the rank and file that really pushed for a better contract. Then the leadership was ready to settle for a somewhat less attractive contract in that case. So, it really depends on this. I don't think you can generalize that easily, especially right now. One other thing that we see in the polling data, though, this is not the report, but the Gallup poll and the Pew people who ask people questions about their attitudes toward unions, there's much more public support generally for the idea of unionization. And there's also a tremendous amount of public support for the writers, for the UPS, for people who are trying to either through a strike or some other kind of organizing to get a better deal. There's a lot of recognition among the broader public about the growth of inequality, the unfairness of a lot of employment situations, et cetera. So the real obstacle is the law. So what makes it possible for all those delays we were talking about before at Starbucks, et cetera, is the grim state of the labor law and the impasse in Washington on doing anything to change it. So there is this PRO Act that's been floating around for a few years that would probably make a difference. We have a fantastic Biden appointee to the NLRB, Jennifer Abruzzo, who's trying to change things. But really, without serious labor law reform, it's hard to see how the needle is going to move. So yeah, union leaders, sometimes, some are better than others. There's all kinds of complicated dynamics there. But I think the real obstacle is management resistance, which is very much facilitated by the lopsided character of the law, which has in the private sector, which has really essentially been captured by corporate interests, in that it, you know, the letter of the law still exists. The National Labor Relations Act, it is the law of the land, but it's been eviscerated through court decisions and new tactics that employers and union busters have made routine. And so it's really, really hard to get anywhere without changing that, in my view anyway. I don't know if I really answered your question, but.
Oh, thank you.
Lizette Cologne?
Hi, Ruth. Nice meeting you. I mean, I see your name, but I have never have been in front of you. So nice seeing you here. As you are talking and people are asking questions, I would love to bring the discussion to our own union. And how can we bring the energy to the rank and file? And in what way you have seen, or I don't know if you have been able to, in that data that you are sharing with us, have you been able to get the feedback from members in our own union? Why are they so apathetic to be involved and engaged? Personally, I retired this past January, and I was always active, and then I realized as a retiree, you're no longer part of a union, because you and it's a sad confrontation with reality. But so when they were talking about all the activities that we can have, we still have that kind of energy, that kind of drive to keep looking for ways in making our own union better, because we know that it can be better. We would like to see it more democratic, that they will allow the people from rank and file to tell and say and share their own input. But many times, and I wonder if you have been able to analyze that, in what way we can allow the people at the bottom to show and tell what we need, so that there will be changes that will keep us engaged and keep us thriving, for just pushing for more. Especially now as retirees, we see that we will love our voices to be heard, and we are not being heard as retirees. So tell me, I mean, it's a big question and it's a lot of analysis, but I feel like we keep talking in the like in abstract, but I would love to see our union stronger. And there's a question in the chat from John Highland, which is key. And it talks about the MLC. And it's a big mystery about how we are just subjected to the MLC decisions. So no matter what we say and what we do, the pattern established. So whoever negotiates first, then we are doomed and we have no power. So tell me, give me hope. Give me hope. Thank you.
Oh goodness, I'm not really the right person to answer this question. I mean, I'm not that active myself. I'm a member, obviously, but and I'm not retired. I think though the union has been struggling very hard to try to change the Medicare stuff. I know Debbie Bell is on this call and could tell us much more about those efforts, and they haven't been without results. I mean, it's a totally uphill battle, but it's not like nothing's happened as a result of that. There's tremendous concern and mobilization. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening in the bigger city unions, and so that's part of the problem maybe. But and I guess I don't see it quite so negatively. I don't know, maybe it's because I hang out at the graduate center and I see all the the graduate students there, many of whom are adjuncts, are extremely active in various rank and file groups and so on. I don't always agree with them, but they are definitely, making their voices heard, and so are a number of the other members around the union. So I don't see an apathetic rank and file so much, though I may have a distorted view of it, but maybe other people have more information about all that. I'm sorry, I haven't really researched the PSC situation in any depth.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Ruth? I'm sure they're going to think of their questions half hour later. This, oh, there we go. Okay. Peter Reynes.
Ruth, you mentioned the UAW strike.
There's no
Again,
strike yet, but there might be. Yeah.
yes, and I haven't heard in the last couple of days, but it seems to me this is a crucial strike by a very strategic union, and they make up 3% of the national income, GNP. I would think this would be a moment for the Democratic Party to leave its corporate connection and really move in the direction of unionization, particularly coming election, try to pull off some of these, Trump white male voters. This is a key issue for them. And this would be a good moment for much more intervention by Biden. I know he's a recessive kind of president, but what do you think can be done to get him off his stool?
I mean, it's so complicated because, the UAW has held back an endorsement of Biden in the next election, partly because of their concern about the electric vehicle plants, which I don't know. I can't say I really agree with this view, but they are concerned that those cars are much less labor intensive to build. And so they're worried about, even if the plants do become UAW plants, that they'll have fewer members as the country shifts more in that direction. So that's one issue. I don't know. Well, I agree with you. It's a crucial sector. What worries me is whether in my head, I'm comparing it to the UPS situation. In the UPS situation, all the diamonds kind of lined up, right? Or the stars or whatever you call it. I'm not a gambler, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's a growing industry, extremely profitable. This is the one unionized company. The Teamsters had been doing a lot of internal organizing leading up to it, sort of practicing for a strike. Like they took it so seriously, and they were really, really well prepared to deliver on the threat if they had to. So they won a really good deal without having to go on strike, which, was pretty remarkable. I don't quite see that leverage in the auto case. I mean, sure, it would be a drag for those three companies to all be struck. I mean, it would mean, as you said, they're a big part of the economy. There are all kinds of multiplier effects, et cetera. That's true. On the other hand, I suspect that the companies could take a strike more easily than UPS could have, it wouldn't be as big a crisis for them as it would have been for UPS. So I don't know whether they're as well prepared either. There's been a lot of kind of public drama about it, throwing the proposals into the trash can on videos, and maybe you've seen this too. And I think there is a lot of anger in the rank and file, because these companies, this didn't used to be true not that many years ago, but they have been extremely profitable. Basically, what's left of the US auto industry, they mainly make trucks and Jeeps and SUVs and stuff like that. That's a niche that they've kind of dominated in. And so they're not competing in those products so much with Toyota and these other non-union transplants that are all over the country. And they've made a lot of money doing that. So they have the money to pay for this if they want to. I mean, if they're willing to. I guess it's going to be interesting to see what happens. The Biden question, I don't know what to say. We saw what happened with that railway situation last fall. That was a little different in that it would have really paralyzed the economy had it gone through, but I don't think he pulled out all the stops. And even though he talks about being the most pro-union president ever and all that, I guess the proof is in the pudding. So we'll see. I agree with you. It's a critical sector, and one, it'll be very interesting to see what happens on Friday. But I'm not as hopeful maybe as you are. I mean, I just don't know what will happen. I think it's really up for grabs. And you're right, the political support could make a big difference. I think the public will support those workers if they strike. And there's tremendous anger in the rank and file, it seems like. They see that these CEOs collect these huge, huge amounts of money, and they sit there and, do these horrible jobs and are, facing stagnant economic situations. So there's plenty of justice there, but that's not how you win necessarily, is by having justice on your side. It has to be organized and strategic and all the rest of it. So I think we'll see. I don't know what will happen.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. It was very informative, thought-provoking. We appreciate you taking time to come and talk with us. And of course, the report is available. I think we sent out the link in the last blast, but I don't know if somebody wants to throw it up into the chat. I think we can take the last 10 minutes. There may be a couple people who want to make announcements. And I know that Debbie is still here. Earlier on, there was a question that Michael Foley, if you're still here, might be able to answer about is it the RSV vaccine or the RVS vaccine? Michael, are you here? Maybe not. Okay. John, you have an announcement, I know, about the rally, right? Can't hear you.
Okay. This is an announcement basically, from the Environmental Justice Working Group. There's a big, important rally on September 17th in Manhattan. It's end fossil fuels, I think is the main theme. The rally is going to be over by the UN in the 50s. Unfortunately, I don't have. There are meeting places. I know there's one group, the Third Act, a group of seniors and retirees that Cecilia McCall has been working with, and she circulated an email about the location of meeting, and I think it's my sense is it's probably on the PSC website, but I do want the people who are here at this meeting to put in their calendars the 17th. I think it believes that begins at 12 o'clock, and I would hope that there's more done to put out like a blast to the membership to come to that meeting. It's that rally rather. It's very important.
Yeah, we put it out in the last, I think, 2 blasts, John. We'll do it again. I think if we have time to do it again. And I'm assuming that information is on the PSC website. I certainly hope that it's on the PSC website. I see Michael Foley is here. Did you get that question about Michael is one of our welfare fund directors. Did you get the question?
I did, Ann, thank you. So it's regarding the RSV vaccine. Right now, RSV normally is associated with young children, but those of us who are over 60, RSV has been spreading rapidly, and a lot of our members are very concerned about it, and rightfully so. The problem is right now is coverage for the vaccine. GHI Senior Care doesn't really want to cover it. We're working with CVS SilverScript to make it available to our members. We're sort of caught right now in the middle. I anticipate having a breakthrough within a few days even regarding coverage for the RSV vaccine. What a lot of insurance companies are doing right now is they're saying, well, the CDC hasn't put it on the list of annual vaccine schedules for adults, so they're taking a pass on it. Right now, everyone sort of is just trying to avoid the issue as best they can, insurance companies or pharmacies. What I would suggest is keeping an eye on our website. I can also let Ann know if there's some significant news regarding the vaccine, and hopefully we'll have better news with working with our partner at CVS, and so it'll become available through SilverScript hopefully in the near future.
Thank you, Michael. Any more questions for Michael, welfare fund related, or Debbie Bell is still here? We have a couple more minutes. Otherwise, I can just preview for you the October 2nd meeting. Did somebody say something? October 2nd, we're going to go back and look at last November's election. I think I mentioned it in my remarks, with an eye toward learning what we can learn for future elections and how we can be active in electing candidates who are, friendly to social justice issues and unions and so forth. We're having two speakers. One will be Nikki Richardson, who is the legislative director from NYSET. A lot of people have questions about NYSET, so she'll be there. And the other speaker is John Tarleton. John is now the editor of a newsletter called The Independent, and John was the associate editor of our Clarion, working with Peter Hognes for many years. And I think that would also be a good time to invite to our meeting the person from New York City Tech, Liz, whose name I think I forget, who directs our COPE initiative, because COPE goes with activism. Activism needs money, and that's what Vote COPE is all about. So with that, I thank you all for attending. I think it was a really good meeting. Remember to sign up. Let's get more members. Let's get you signed up. And write to us at retirees@pscmail.org if you have questions, comments, and so forth. You should soon be receiving the first edition of our newsletter. I don't know exactly when that's going to be out. And stay healthy, get your vaccines, and we'll see you hopefully on the 17th at the rally that John just announced. He mentioned Third Act. Cecilia is our PSC rep to Third Act, and she's actually going to be one of our speakers in November. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved by hands. Okay, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.